Rent is a musical that has become somewhat of a cultural phenomenon since its premiere back in 1996. It tells the story of a group of struggling artists, musicians, performers living in the East Village in New York City during the late 1980s and the early 90s. But what is the real story that inspired this musical? Find out today on the history behind the musical. The story of Rent is kind of based on the real experiences of its writer, Jonathan Larson. Larson was a struggling playwright who worked as a waiter before finding success with this musical. He lived with his friend in the East Village during the height of the AIDS epidemic, and that was his friend, Matt O'Grady. At the time, New York City was like one of the epicenters of the epidemic, and the disease was ravaging through the gay community and other marginalized groups, or at least that's what they would have you believe. However, Rent itself would never have happened without a man named Billy Aronson, a behind the scenes figure in the musical's creation that a lot of people don't really know about for some reason. Even though Larson wasn't really very much involved in the project near the beginning, he was the one who actually brought the whole idea of re envisioning La Boheme and setting it in contemporary New York City, which would be in that time, the 90s of New York. In its early stages, Larson's passion project, would you will, of struggle, strife, life, and love, he worked on it with Aronson. According to Aronson, the song Rent came first, along with Santa Fe, which was inspired by Aronson's group of friends who'd fantasized about skipping town for Santa Fe. Um, the problem was Larson wasn't really making any headway, and Aronson was having an issue continuing to commit and work on this project without essentially getting the moolah. So after working on it really hard, they put it down for about 2 years, and Larson calls up Aronson. He's like, "Hey, can I just do this by myself without you?" And Aronson was like, "Have at it," because he didn't want to waste the time they had already spent on it. So he told Jonathan Larson, "Go ahead and do what you can." Now, Larson himself was also a struggling artist, living in poverty and working odd jobs while he pursued his dream of writing musicals. He wrote Rent in the early 90s, and the show premiered off Broadway in 96. The Soho apartment that he shared with his best friend, Buckhart, would come to life, complete with rocking roll posters, folding chairs, metal tables, extension cords, and just about everything else they had decorating their apartment at that time in the musical. In fact, most of the characters in Rent are based on real people that Larson knew and loved, including that very roommate, Jonathan Burkhart, who is a partial inspiration for Mark. The other part of the inspiration for Mark is Larson himself. Of course, the names and identities of the characters in Rent were still also very much inspired by in Puccini's original play, La Boheme. However, they're not perfect adaptations of their predecessors. For example, Joanne in Rent represents the character of Alcindoro in Boheme, but also was partially based on Marcello. Joanne was the only character whose predecessor in La Boheme was a different sex. Larson had also been absorbing stories from an organization called Friends Indeed. And Friends Indeed is an organization that supported people in gay and marginalized communities to help throughout the AIDS epidemic. So the life support group where Mimi and Tom bond at is actually based on this real life organization. The character of Mimi, which is played by Daphne Rubin Vega in the original Broadway cast, was based on the character Mimi of La Boheme, who was a seamstress suffering from tuberculosis, as well as a dancer. Rent was a groundbreaking musical that brought issues like AIDS, poverty, and addiction to the forefront of pop culture. Rent premiered off Broadway in 1996 and quickly became a sensation. The show moved to Broadway the following year and won several Tony Awards, including Best Musical. Unfortunately, Jonathan Larson died tragically the night of the dress rehearsal right before Rent's off Broadway premiere. He suffered from an aortic aneurysm, and his death was devastating, both to the cast and the crew. And sadly, he never got to see his work blow up in the way it did. Now, there are certain people, especially among critics, who wonder if Rent would have been the success it was if he had not died. And it's a fair question considering how many people really blow up after and become more famous after death. But given the amazing show Rent is, I feel like it would have still had its success. Rent's impact on pop culture was enormous, and it helped bring the issue of HIV and AIDS, as well as LGBTQ plus rights, to a wider audience. It was a tribute to the resilience and the creativity that people who lived and loved in the East Village during one of the darkest times in New York City's histories. The show's legacy continues to this day in countless productions around the world and the 2005 film adaptation. Rent remains a powerful reminder of the struggles and triumphs of the LGBTQ plus community during the AIDS epidemic, and it continues to inspire new generations of artists and activists today. Rent continues to be a powerful reminder of the struggles that marginalized communities face and the power of art to inspire hope and change. Rent is more than just a musical. It's a testament to the power of art to inspire change and create empathy. The show's origins in the personal experiences of its creators and the loss of so many friends to AIDS make it a deeply emotional and meaningful work. Rent's impact on pop culture is undeniable, and its legacy continues to inspire new generations of artists to tell their own stories of struggle and triumph. So that's everything I have today, and hopefully you enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up, leave a comment about anything you think about the video, and subscribe to see more, not just of this kind of content, but of other kinds of content that I do on this channel. You can follow all my various social media, which will be right here on the screen. And yeah, that's everything I have to say. So, bye.